Hi there, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Carmen, and I'm basically just someone who loves to sew her own clothes and likes showing you how to do it too. So when you're just getting started with learning how to sew swimwear, it's really common for people to wonder if they need a serger to sew swimwear, because you really see it everywhere in tutorials and videos and things of people sewing swimwear. They're almost always using a serger. And so that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. We're going to talk about whether or not you actually do need a serger to sew swimwear. So let's get started. So first, let's just talk about sergers in general. So a serger will sew an overlock stitch, which uses 3 or 4 threads, depending on what you choose to use. I typically use a 4-thread overlock stitch. And this stitch basically just interlocks those threads, and it creates a really beautiful looking stitch that covers up the raw edges of the fabric, and the seam just looks really, really nice. And the seam also allows the fabric to stretch. So the overlock stitch is a type of stitch that will allow the fabric to stretch without the threads snapping. So that's why it's really great for swimwear. So a serger also trims and sews and finishes your fabric all in one step. So it saves you time when you are sewing swimwear. So using a serger is basically just a faster and a more efficient way of sewing stretchy fabrics, and you get a really beautiful seam from it. That is if your settings are right, but that is another topic for another day. So now for the question, do you actually need a serger to sew swimwear? And the answer is no, you do not need a serger to sew swimwear. You can use just a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch, which is the lightning bolt type stitch, on your regular sewing machine to sew swimwear. You don't need to have a serger. Using a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch on your regular sewing machine will also allow the fabric to stretch without your thread snapping. So you cannot use a straight stitch on your regular machine, because when you try to stretch the fabric, your seam, the threads in your seam will very likely snap. So you need to use a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch, the lightning bolt, like I said, if you are going to use your regular sewing machine. And using a sewing machine and using a zigzag stitch will require a little bit more messing with the length and width of the zigzag in order to get the right stitch for your project. So I'll just give you a few tips on choosing the right width and length of your zigzag for your projects. So if you sew using a zigzag stitch and when you stretch the seam, if it snaps, if the threads snap in your seam, then you want to try shortening the length of your zigzag stitch and also potentially increasing the width of your stitch as well. Now, if when you sew your seam, you stretch the seam, you see laddering. So basically short horizontal threads show through on the outer side of your swimsuit or the outer side of your seam. If you can see what looks like a ladder, so like a series of small horizontal threads showing through, then you are going to want to try decreasing the width of your zigzag stitch. Because if the width is too wide, then you'll get that laddering effect on the outside of your swimsuit. And getting the right settings depends on your machine and also on the fabric that you're using for your project. So definitely test out your stitches on a scrap fabric or a scrap piece of your fabric before you actually start sewing your whole swimsuit, because you want to make sure that you get the stitch width and length locked in, make sure everything is looking good before you go on to actually sewing your swimsuit. So another tip for when you're sewing swimwear using a sewing machine rather than a serger is to get a walking foot for your sewing machine. So a walking foot really is a life changer when it comes to sewing knits and swim fabrics, stretchy fabrics, because the walking foot will help the fabric to feed through the machine evenly, so it will prevent that kind of waviness that you get that you often get when you use a sewing machine to sew knit fabrics. So my machine comes with a built-in walking foot, but if yours doesn't, you can just search online and find a walking foot that you can just purchase separately and attach to your machine just like any other sewing machine foot. So now that we have established that you can sew swimwear without a serger, I do want to say that using a serger will be faster and easier than using a sewing machine. That is, once you get past the learning curve of learning how to use your serger. I find it to be a lot faster and easier than my regular machine. I also just really like the look of the overlock stitch better than the zigzag stitch. In fact, I usually use a combination of serger and sewing machine when I sew my swimwear, so I'll sew all the main seams of the swimsuit and most of the swimsuit with my serger, and then at the very end, when all I have left to do is to flip the elastic to the inside and top stitch, I'll top stitch using my sewing machine. And to do that top stitching, I will use either a zigzag stitch like we already talked about, or a double needle, because if you use a double needle on your sewing machine for top stitching, then it will allow the fabric to stretch, because the double needle will have 2 rows of stitches on the outside and a zigzag on the back. So that zigzag on the back will allow the stitch to stretch. So that's how I do it. Sew most of the swimsuit with my serger, and then just top stitch all the openings at the end with my sewing machine using a zigzag or a double needle. So basically, you definitely do not need a serger to sew swimwear, but once you know that you are going to stick with sewing swimwear and you've got a lot of projects waiting, then I would definitely start thinking about potentially getting a serger if it's in your budget, because in my opinion, it just makes things a lot faster and easier if you plan to sew a lot of swimwear and a lot of stretchy fabrics. So that is it for this video, but before I close it out, I wanted to really quickly mention that if you are interested in getting step-by-step help and all the information you need to sew beautiful swimsuits all in one place, then I have actually created an online course all about sewing swimwear. I'm so excited for this. So this course is coming out this month in October 2020. So I'm super excited. And if you are interested in getting into the course, where I have almost 10 hours of lessons all about sewing swimwear, plus a private Facebook group for students so that students can help each other and also get help from me in the Facebook group. If you are interested in getting into the course, you can check out the description in this video. I will leave a link there to where you can get onto my email list, where I will send you information as soon as the course is live, and of course some information leading up to it so you know what's going on with it. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested. If you're watching this video after October 2020, then the course is already live, and I will change the link in the description to just the link to the page where you can find all the information about the course and where you can sign up for the course and everything like that. So check that out if you're interested, but I hope that you have enjoyed this video today, and I will see you in the next one.